Welcome back. On Viewpoint today, we delve into the shortage in the labor market, which has been a global phenomenon following the adoption of the new normal amid the pandemic across countries. Now, for more on this reality, I have Professor Joon-seok at Sookmyung Women's University joining us live on the landline, I believe. Professor Oh, it's good to hear from you, that is.
Thank you for having me.
Right. I also have Charles Krugel, an attorney of law of labor and employment law, that is, based in Chicago. It's been a while, Mr. Krugel. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me back.
Right. Professor O, we'll start with you then. Before we delve into the actual labor issue here, let's have a few words from you on the Bank of Korea's most recent interest rate hike. Now, this giant step was largely expected, I believe, right, Professor O?
It was theoretically expected already, but as you know, that when the interest rate is increased, then the all type of cost increased. As a result, consumption decreased. So today, the Bank of Korea took a big step hike rather than giant step in response to the U.S. Fed's decision. Interest rate changes are closely related with foreign exchange rate changes. When the interest gap balance between two countries is broken, foreign exchange rate becomes more highly volatile. Capital flight to safe harbor country, the United States, triggers. So global investors' portfolio eventually will be converted into dollar-denominated securities, selling Korean won in order to buy U.S. dollars. In this respect, it must be a tough decision for the Bank of Korea, but it is the right decision, and there is no other choice to increase interest rates afterwards.
Right, unfortunately, of course, then. And now, Professor, how do you explain the shortage in labor here in South Korea?
The question seems very easy to answer, but hard to solve. The Korea Integrated Logistics Association reported the package sorting sites have been suffering for a shortage of around 7,000 manpower annually. Reasons for the labor shortage are complicated, mainly three. One possible reason is that major layoff during the pandemic drove part-time workers out of job market for good. The increase in the number of online jobs during the pandemic influenced the current labor shortage, and the number of delivery drivers, a typical gig job in Korea, rose 9.7% on year to 428,000 employees. And the second is the digital nomads. The supply of labor in the service industry has been shrinking as non-face-to-face jobs within the sector have become more popular, and the number of so-called digital nomads has increased. And the last is a decline in the youth population. According to Statistics Korea had 8.59 million people with an age of 15 to 29 as of May, which is lower than 8.79 million people in May 2021. This particular age group, which includes university students, new graduates, is considered to be the most active group in the service industry, and the number is rapidly decreasing nowadays.
Right, I see. And Mr. Krugel, what appear to be the reasons behind the lack of workers there in the U.S. then?
Well, some of the same reasons that Professor O pointed out, actually, with a little bit of a different spin on those reasons. So we have, and also to add, we have more restrictive and poorly implemented immigration laws and policies. So that's been very restrictive and very hurtful to employers. As Professor O pointed out, there's fewer young people entering the workforce. And in the U.S., we also have a lot of older people leaving the workforce, and people who left the workforce during the pandemic haven't returned, or at least haven't returned in large numbers. So there's been that lagging indicator. And we also have the smaller middle or shrinking middle class in the U.S. with fewer people in the workforce because of the shrinking middle class. And I think to some extent, too, climate change and extreme weather has impacted U.S. labor markets also, because it means a change in really the whole nature of work and how we work.
Right, I see. Professor O, so the labor market shortage is a reality, and what have been perhaps some of the consequences of the absence of workers here on the local front first then?
if taken any actions, negative effect will prevail from the perspective of stability and sustainability of return on growth. But I do believe market and business sectors will develop and transform its business model, gaining momentum of economic growth in line with changes of labor affordability. In Korea, the job crunch started before the coronavirus outbreak due to a steep rise in the minimum wage. The pandemic has fueled the trend. Now, major business chains back to normalcy are staffed at 70 to 90% of pre-pandemic level, but there aren't enough applicants like before. Moreover, as migrant workers have gone to home country during the pandemic, and the labor shortage as smaller companies is so acute nowadays due to entry restrictions during the pandemic. Cinemas, restaurants, hotels, and cafes are having a hard time hiring workers as the number of customers surged after business lockdown were lifted. As service requiring face-to-face interaction are having a particularly tough time, they change their business pattern of service, providing online ticketing, self-ticketing system, all Lotte Cinema branches and few Megabox and CGV branches. Those are popular film theater chains in Korea currently operate without cinema ticket clubs. Instead, vending machine, mobile ticketing, and AI robots replace and supplement existing business model. Now is the time they require comprehensive measures to make the private economy more vibrant, and then deregulation and improvement of their business model is required.
Right. And Mr. Krugel, which sectors that in the U.S. perhaps have been hardest hit by the labor shortage?
Well, I think the hardest hit sector is manufacturing, anything involving skilled and unskilled labor. So you have construction, trades, manufacturing, mining, extraction, tech manufacturing, all those subsectors in the one sector of skilled and unskilled labor have been hit the hardest. I think secondarily you have retail and food service, anything involving customer service and customer relations. There's fewer face-to-face interactions in the retail industry, so that means stores have gotten or laid off a lot of people in that area, the face-to-face interactions with people, with customers. And then I think to a lesser extent, education, especially public education, fewer teachers and paraprofessionals are in public education now.
Right, I see. And Mr. Krugel, are efforts being made perhaps to ensure that there are more teachers within the academic arena? I mean, learning has to go on after the pandemic as well.
Yeah, there's efforts, but I don't think they've really done much so far, at least not in the short run.
Right,
the government's trying to increase access to educational opportunities for younger people, but I don't think that's really helping much right now either. So.
Right. Professor, do you suppose this is a temporary phenomenon, or does it look to become a long-term challenge?
It's a complex phenomenon. Part-time workers are turning to work that can be done online or without contact with other people, like online tutoring and food delivery. The Korean government tightened the entry restriction on migrant workers since the COVID-19 pandemic. Many workers left Korea, and too few have been allowed to enter Korea to fill their job. Thus, a part of shortage could be alleviated by return of migrant workers. But in terms of quality of labor, required level of training and education within so short a time cannot be upgraded nor cut off. Education is not a factory production that produces immediate output from input. So according to research, there were 179,885 employees in the semiconductor industry in Korea as of 2020, and then 1,621 short of the level needed for proper management. In this respect, quantity imbalance between labor supply and demand will be getting better, but the problem is quality mismatch between job market's want and labor's quality, which will take time to converge into the equilibrium. It will be a tough task and big challenge for the Korean economy now and afterwards.
Right. Mr. Krugel, what efforts are being made by authorities there in the U.S. then to address the absence of workers? We talked about slight government efforts to boost the academic arena. What about the other sectors?
Sure. I think there's four key things. You have lobbying by business associations and groups, lobbying with government, our legislatures, and other political and elected leaders. and you have more corporate in-house education. You have more corporations that are picking up the slack in public and private education. They're doing more in-house education regarding company culture and also literacy and communication skills for workers. And then third, you have more remote and flexible work opportunities, including flexible work schedules for employees. And I think fourth, you have greater financial incentives for employees to stay, such as bonuses to stay or referral bonuses to refer in new coworkers, and more flexible benefits too.
Right, and staying with what Mr. Krugel has said, Professor O, do you suppose a shift in working arrangements may boost the workforce? For instance, a blend of remote and in-person working here in South Korea?
In the short term, yes, but labor shortage, not only at small companies, but farms and then the fisheries is so acute due to entry restrictions. So a total of 73,000 migrant workers will be brought in by the end of this year. According to government's plan, with the ease of entry restrictions, it is possible for foreign workers to return to Korea. But there are not that enough for flight. The increase in flight ticket price is another obstacle, to my surprise, for migrant workers returning to Korea. But in the long term, to resolve the problem, services should recruit all the people as a step with a package of training and re-education programs. Moreover, there should be a major reform for contact workers in particular. We need to suggest a long-term vision since the younger people decide to go and learn to at work. In brief, hiring middle-aged people and the elderly to reduce the labor shortage. And on the other hand, we have to draw up solutions that are appealing for the young generation in the longer perspective.
Right, we do. Mr. Krugel, some pundits claim inflation has rendered the act of commuting, that is, to and from work, quite costly, and hence the absence of workers, especially in sectors where the pay itself is quite meager. How do you respond to this?
Well, first, it's true. Commuting is a much more expensive and costlier and a lot bigger of a hassle for workers these days, especially workers at the lower end of the economy, lower wage earners, and also urban workers. So I think what you have is, according to Forbes, the average commuter spends, or average worker spends, around $6,000 upwards to $10,000 a year in commuting expenses, depending on location too. It's going to vary. But also the U.S. poverty, the poverty level has increased in the U.S. So that means with more people in poverty, you have fewer people who could afford that commute. Also, fuel costs are at a record high. Real wages are lower too. Even though I've seen some statistics that say that the poverty level is better, I think the real wage, the lower real wages have kept the poverty level pretty high. So I just think it's been pretty bad for consumers and for the average worker in terms of the cost of commuting, and that's also impacted employers.
Right, and staying with you, Mr. Krugel,
yeah.
It's not just the cost of commuting to and from work. Some people have pointed out it's also a phenomenon known as lunchflation, perhaps, that's keeping workers from going to work and perhaps keeping quite a lot of them to choose, to opt for, that is, remote working from home, where they can choose to have their lunch there as well. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, we're seeing some increase in that, it appears, and more flexibility with employers to offer that option. Whether or not it's going to stick, as the pandemic seems to be winding down, it's hard to say. And who knows if another pandemic or epidemic arises, what's going to happen with that, factor with the remote working and, greater flexibility. So it's all kind of in flux right now, and it's really hard to predict. It
really is. Professor O, given South Korea's falling birth rate and aging society, what are some of the long-term plans perhaps that the country needs to draw up to ensure a healthy workforce in the future?
It's a very important question. In the very short-term measure, the ministry has streamlined part of administrative procedures for employers of immigrant workers, including non-scheduled flights from countries like Indonesia, Nepal, Myanmar, to help immigrant workers better travel to Korea. But we have to draw up a long-term plan, as you mentioned, the systemic change of the labor market eventually, as Mr. Krugel commented about the flexibility, not to mention the cost of commute, and then lunch inflation and so on. The tendency among the young to avoid working in temporary jobs that do not seem so relevant to their careers, and maybe another contributing factor to the worsening labor shortage. Some experts say that working in offline services may be uncomfortable for some younger people, as they are now very used to non-face-to-face activities due to pandemic. Once again, to resolve the problem, that many sectors of industry should recruit older people as a staff with a package of training and re-education program, and not to mention of the flexibility of their labor market. In addition, designing a plan for upgrading country competitiveness should be developed, monitored, and sustained from the viewpoint of brain gain or globalization of recruiting.
Right. Mr. Krugel, simply speaking, do you suppose then raising wages is perhaps one of the most viable way of seeking a dedicated workforce then?
Could be, only if raising wages is greater, or wages rise faster than the cost of living in the U.S. So if right now it doesn't appear to be happening that way, so as real wages don't appear to be rising faster than the cost of living, it appears that raising wages is kind of a Pyrrhic sort of step to take. It's important and it's helpful, but I don't think it's I don't know if it is the most viable. We won't know for maybe another 6 months to a year or so. There's still flexibility in workplace relations that's important, and other factors like benefits, which is also going to play a factor into what's going to increase workplace dedication and loyalty.
Right. Professor Oh, as a scholar in the academic arena, what do you suppose could universities seek to do to address the labor shortage at the moment here in South Korea?
It's a very good question because from now, the university might be up to the limit because there are too many restrictions, and then there is not much room for develop, and then to do kind of research and development fund is not left. So from the longer perspective, that the university should be understood from the society as a research and development center, and then it might be the first stepping stone to improve the labor condition for the prosperity of the Korean economy in the future.
Right. Mr. Krugel, given the labor shortage over there in the U.S., what are the chances of the government there deciding perhaps to further open its market to foreign workers? I mean, what is the legal framework with regard to foreign workers there in the U.S.?
Well, it's too restrictive right now, and it's been too restrictive for a while. So hopefully, like I indicated earlier, you have lobbying and business associations and groups, who are lobbying government, legislature, their legislators to open up the immigration system more and make it more flexible. So, if that happens, maybe that'll help ease the labor shortage and increase opportunities here too.
What would be the public's perception, that is, with regard to that possible option, do you think, Mr. Krugel, opening up the labor market to foreign workers?
I think 50% would think it's great and 50% would think it's horrible.
Right, I see. Professor Oh, you mentioned how the farming sector here in South Korea is in desperate need of laborers as well. What do we have in store with regard to having more foreign workers in the country in the agriculture sector?
More than anything else, that the quantity of labor should be supplemented by immigrant workers. So, to give them the kind of comfortable and then stable working condition and the living condition should be provided, and then as a kind of social security net, they should be protected. That is one of the things for them to make a final destination for Korea.
Mr. Krugel, this next question is a very broad question. Do you suppose the labor laws in place there in the U.S. are well designed, perhaps, to protect the interests of the average laborer in the United States?
Yeah, to an extent, I believe they are, especially since the 1960s. Prior to the 1960s, they were more in favor, I think, of employers. And I think since the 60s, with the increase of more civil rights enforcement statutes in favor of employees, I believe they are. And that also kind of coincides with the decline in union membership, which is still, union membership, I believe, is still in decline, even though there's a lot of media coverage that claiming that it's not, or that there's at least more organizing going on. But it's hard, I haven't seen the statistics that support that.
Right, I see. All right, Mr. Krugel, thank you so much for taking my impromptu questions and the others as well. And Professor, thank you for your thoughts as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.